Welcome to Conversation with Buddy. I'm your host, Buddy Puckett. Well, week after week, we do this podcast. I think we're 2 years and 4 months into this. And if you've heard early on, the original goal was to go 1 year and see where we were at. And at the end of 1 year, we still had people that wanted to share their testimony. That's really what we want. It's not about me. It's about the testimony of people. And we hope that they encourage you. So thank you for listening each week. We just got done with Christmas and we're heading into a new year by the time this podcast is airing. And I'm excited for 2025, and I'm going to wait and hear about my guest to see if he's excited for 2025. I hope that he is. I bet he is. But we were praying for his dad this morning. We won't maybe talk a ton about it, but all of us have pain in our life. And I hope and pray that the story and the stories that we have really encourage us to seek after you, after the Lord, and to be encouraged. So here we go. So let me introduce my guest. His name is Kevin Coriano. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Dude, thanks for being here, man. Here we are. We talked about this for a little while.
Yeah.
So I've only gotten to know you over the last few months, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, and you got to work with my dad. Helping my mom and dad buy a house, and
I gotta be honest with you, it's one of the funnest days of my life. I've been doing this for 26 years, and so we're gonna talk about Carlos and Lonnie, and I think your dad's one of the funniest guys I know, and he acts like he's like, I think, what I say, 50.
Yeah.
But he's a couple years older than that.
Just a few. 87.
87.
Yeah.
Well, after their closing, me, you, and your mom and dad went for lunch at Adams. Where did we go? We went to
Bowen Vine
out South Salem. And
yeah.
Honestly, I don't really do that. It's not really something I do. I'm happy to do it, but it was fun. I feel like you guys are family. And so
thank you.
What a joy just to be around your dad and mom and you. And so, well, we're going to talk about you today. This is all about you, Kevin. We're going to hear kind of like about your life, kind of where you grew up, how God's worked in your life, family, wife, kids, because you have 3 boys, right?
3 boys.
Holy cow.
Yeah, 7, 5, and 3.
Your poor wife, man. She's outnumbered. She's tough.
Even our dog's a
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
It's funny. My family have a wife and 2 daughters and a female dog and female cats.
Yeah.
And I've been the outnumbered guy. So, I'm excited just to unpack a little bit of your life. But let's go back. Let me introduce you real quick. I got some notes that you gave me, and I'm going to just kind of briefly talk about you and then maybe have you unpack where life began and just kind of where you're at today. So you grew up in Alaska. What part of Alaska?
Anchorage.
Okay.
Yeah, big city. Yeah.
Then you went to Corban. So somehow you figure out how to get down here to Salem, got your undergrad degree here at Corban, and then went to George Fox College for PT. Okay. You've been married for 10 years.
Yep.
You have 3 boys. Tell me their ages again.
7, 5, and 3.
Names.
River, Micah, and Ezra.
That was oldest to youngest?
Yep.
What's your wife's name?
Allie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, you're blessed, man.
So definitely.
You work as an orthopedic PT in Salem, and name of your company is Healing Motion.
Physical therapy.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long have you worked there?
I worked there for about 2.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've been practicing for about 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You enjoy running, hiking, and anything outdoors. And I think your wife posted something. Didn't you run like a marathon recently?
Yeah, I did a trail marathon at Silver Creek Falls.
Okay.
Yeah.
How was that?
It might have been one of the craziest things I've ever done. Yeah.
But you did it. What made you decide to do that? I mean, that is crazy.
I ran most of my life. I ran in college.
Yeah.
I ran marathons after that and halves. And this year I was fortunate to be healthy, and I took care of my body to run and ran several races. And I saw the Silver Creek Falls race, and it looked gorgeous and really pretty. And I like the challenge of like what am I able to do and kind of push the body and and just also a great way, like just the training part of it. It's just a great way for me to reset, kind of connect with God, pray, and just dwell on things in a good way.
Totally. No, I get
that. Yeah. But that marathon trail race was a beast. The elevation gain, you run through a creek. It It was rainy. It was fun. It was one of those things where runners, it's just a wild, crazy bunch. But
to clarify, a marathon is 26.2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 26.2. Yeah.
Wow, that's tough.
It was good. Yeah. So I have a plan next year of doing several races, and so I'm pretty excited. And that's just what I love doing is those physical things and challenges. And that's why I love being a physical therapist too, is because some people think they see that and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. But I just love seeing the potential in someone. And if someone does have a goal of running a 5K or a half, or an Ironman, like how can I help get them there?
I think it's fantastic. So you love sports, you love helping people, you love to challenge people, you love to challenge yourself. So no, I think it's fantastic. You must be a pretty competitive guy, would you say?
I am.
Not necessarily with other people, but maybe with yourself.
Yeah, with myself. Okay. I definitely try and like set goals for myself, like healthy goals.
Yeah.
But I think it is, I don't know, for me, I love doing that. I just read a book where it was talking about, it's about the comfort crisis in our society.
Comfort crisis.
And how our society is about just how can we make life as easy as possible. And I'm guilty of that too. But how it is healthy to push the body and kind of, it is good to have those comforts in life, but we are meant to kind of push, and you just see that in like emotional, like stress, like not saying like emotional stress is healthy, but like, someone is more mature when they go through a traumatizing thing, like and they've gone through it. They can understand someone else's pain and those kind of things. Muscle literally has to tear in order for it to get stronger. Right. So that stress helps kind of increase our variability of what we're able to do. Yeah. And so I enjoyed that book. It's a little bit more on the extreme side, but I think you have to not take half measures with those kind of things. Yeah. But yeah, I think I just finished it like last week. But anyway,
so it's called The Comfort Crisis.
Yeah,
I'm gonna read that book. Yeah. I read a book recently. It's called the 12-Hour Walk. It's a true story about a guy who he's climbed all the mountains around the world. He's spent 60 days walking across Antarctica, and then during COVID early on he was confined to his house, and so he wrote a book called The 12-Hour Walk because he goes one morning he got up and told his wife he's going to leave the house and I'll be home later. 12 hours later, he comes home. So I think when you hear stories like that, you realize the body can actually do more than you know. And you don't know until you challenge it.
Yep.
But the opposite is if we get really comfortable, then just like a muscle atrophies, I mean, if you don't use that muscle, it's not going to work at all.
Yeah.
And so we have a choice.
Yep.
And I think you're the guy. I mean, see, I'm older than you by a lot. How old are you right now?
I'm 34.
You're 34. Yeah, just a baby.
Oh, gosh.
I'm a lot older than you, but I want to have the same mindset. Even though I've gotten older, I want to get mentally tougher. So I've got a long way to go. So I'm going to be clinging to guys like you that I want to hear what you're doing. So when I see your Facebook post that you've run a marathon.
Oh, Ali posted it.
I know it wasn't. I know you didn't do it. It wasn't, but it challenges me and encourages me to dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
David Goggins. I mean, he does 100-mile ultra marathons or whatever. He's a little extreme. Here's the deal, though. I think that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I try not to tell my patients, because people hear that, like, use it or lose it. Yeah. I'm like, it's use it or it's hard. Like, you can get it. You just have to do the right steps and like listen to your body and do those sorts of things. Yeah. Like, people think it's too late or they're limited by a diagnosis or something that's torn or broken when, I'm a PT because I hurt myself a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, if I tell people like the list of things that I've done or like injured in the past, they'll be surprised. They're like, oh my gosh, like, and you're able to do all these things. Yeah. Not as like a showy thing or anything like that, but it's just like, it's just one of those things that we kind of close ourselves in. Yeah. I try to picture like either like a lane or a circle, like a good circle, like when we were when we were in teenagers, like we were able to do everything within that circle, like jump, run, like hike. But then the older we get, the busier we get, that circle shrinks. And so like that circle's smaller, but you can expand that circle back to as close as, obviously there's factors like age, autoimmune things, and those sorts of things that will limit it. But I feel like but I understand like there is that psyche behind it of it. So
I wonder how much you have to challenge people on what they believe, because if I believe I'm old and I can't do it, well, that's pretty hard to conquer. You may have an answer for me, but if I believe what I'm saying, then I'm not going to believe that you can help me. So how do you challenge somebody's belief system, not necessarily from their faith, but maybe just from a health standpoint?
Yeah, I think you just have to really build that rapport with that patient. It might not take like it just takes a few visits. Like if you listen to them and hear their story and hear their goals. And that is something I'm blessed with by working with Healing Motion Physical Therapy is because they worked this business model where you do get to work with a patient one-on-one the whole time. Like there's no aides or assistants. And so I do get that time with the patient the whole time for 45 minutes each time. So it's not easy, but it gives me that space to kind of build that relationship with each patient and individualize their goals and their rehab with them. And it can be challenging, but sometimes it's just like a light bulb moment of like it doesn't have to mean like you have to just go out and walk for 30 minutes. Like you can literally start with like baby steps and working your way up from there. And I think it's just working on that buy-in on patients. And a patient, like when I was early on as a PT, he cracked me up because we've been working on his chronic low back stuff for a while. And we were probably like 4 or 5 weeks in, and sometimes I tell people like it takes a while to kind of build that. It's that consistency behind it, and it's just you're putting enough into that bank to kind of get that full goal, like getting that functional goal as far as no pain and able to do things. And after like 5 or 6 weeks, he was like, "Oh my gosh, this crap actually works." And I was like, "Thank you." Like, it's because you're doing all the things, like you're buying in, you're making lifestyle changes. And it's just like, I'm like, can I put that in bold letters of like, this crap actually works? But it's just like, it's a silly story, but it's like one of those like things where when you get patients to buy in and make those changes, like that's where you can see those lifelong kind of changes instead of just like these temporary relief as far as like, oh, I'm doing pretty good for a day versus like, oh, I can manage this for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's buy-in. They don't have the ability maybe on their own to believe in themselves. So you're kind of like a cheerleader in a way, just to help them people. I mean, really to challenge their thinking, encourage them, but challenge their thinking, and then do the work. Just try me. Just do it for 6 weeks and see where you're at. If after 6 weeks it doesn't change, no problem. But I would say if they do the work, I bet you 95% of all people get results.
And you still have to like listen to them, modify things or whatnot, and I'll be honest with them. Like if we're not seeing changes even before that, like we should still see some stuff here and there. Then we'll address that. Like we'll talk to the doctor or do these other things so to make sure that they're being heard and they're not just like being like not listened to as far as their pain, because pain's real. Like that's you don't want to ever poo on someone's pain for sure. But. And to loop back to what you were saying about running, it is crazy to hear about, like you were saying, like people can just like, what the body's capable of doing is amazing. Because I've done races where I've heard people say like, oh, I didn't really train for this, or I was injured and I haven't ran for the past month, and they'll run a half marathon or do hood to coast. And it is a lot. Like I think someone said it's like 60% of running is mental and just that pushing through it. So I thought that was interesting as far as what what the body's capable of doing is amazing. And so we kind of sometimes put it in a box.
Right. I'm going to take you back here in a moment because I want you to share a little bit more of your story. But before I do, a couple things, like there's a quote David Goggins has. It's kind of like, I remember doing push-ups one time, and let's say I want to get to 50 push-ups in one, and I can. But my brain at around 20 push-ups says, stop doing push-ups. You can't do any more. And I literally have to say, I'm going to keep going. And so David Goggins has a quote, something like, when your brain says that you're done, you're actually only about 40% there. So on Labor Day weekend, this last Labor Day, I'd read the book, The 12-Hour Walk. So I've been telling my wife, hey, I'm going to do this 12-hour walk. I'm like, I don't know if I can do 12 hours. I mean, that seems like a lot.
Yeah.
But I did agree to just a 3-hour solid walk. So I got up at 6 a.m. On Labor Day, which was on a Monday. And I left the house around 6:45, and I walked straight as fast as I could, just for 3 hours.
Wow.
And it's like 8.5 miles. No big deal. And I came back at 9:45, and I'm like, that was pretty cool. And I do want to get to a point where I actually do 12 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's definitely possible. Will it be a challenge? Of course it'll be a challenge, but no cell phone, just me and the Lord, praying. I found myself praying a lot more, just being grateful and not being distracted with my phone. It was on, so I could, maybe I want to write down a note, but it was on airplane mode, so I couldn't get a text so I told my wife, 3 hours, I'll see you in 3 hours. Hope you come back alive.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's awesome. I think there's something to that, because you said you like to go running to be alone, to pray, and just to be alone.
Yeah.
So I think there's power in that.
Yeah, I think that was like something about the book, is like that idea of being quiet or bored or not having distractions is such a jarring kind of thing nowadays. Because I told somebody, they're like, what do you do when you run? And I'm like, sometimes I listen to music, but sometimes I just don't. Like during that marathon, I didn't have any music or anything, and I just did it. And so, but I had like this funny goal of like, I'm going to pray for each person every mile, or I'm going to like pray for something or be grateful for something each mile.
Come on.
I was pretty solid for the first maybe half of the marathon. The last half of it was me praying, Lord, please get me through this for sure. Cause I was hurting, but I think it's just a great way of like not having any distractions and kind of even like not even like focusing on like you're running, like you're just like, okay, I'm out here. I'm with nature. I'm pushing the body and able to just connect with God in that way. So, yeah.
It's funny. I meet with a guy every couple of weeks. Craig is his name. So Craig, this one's for you if you listen. But when he runs, he literally has certain parts of his run where he's praying for these people or that people. And I think what a cool thing. But we're not used to being alone or in silence. We're used to being, got our phone, got our music, got our whatever, and we're not used to that. So I think God's been tapping on our shoulder the whole time, but we're preoccupied with something.
Yeah.
So getting alone with God would be a really good thing to do. And I think
for sure,
based upon that probably motivated you. Like I can focus on, praying for my dad, or my mom or my wife or my kids.
Yeah, it definitely shifts that focus towards that versus other things. Yeah.
All right, let's go back to the very, very beginning. So you grew up in Alaska. I'm thinking of Alaska. We've traveled up there a little bit, and I think salmon fishing is what I think. Are you a fisherman? Did you grow up fishing?
Yeah, I did fishing. I didn't do a whole lot of hunting. With my dad being a little older, he stopped hunting at a certain age, but we fish quite a bit. My dad had a boat, so we always went halibut fishing and like red snapper and all that. And then, of course, reds and kings and those sorts of things. Totally. So our freezer is usually full of salmon.
Yeah, I bet.
And so my parents just moved down here thanks to you and your crew. Yeah. But that was one thing my mom was super bummed about is moving down here because she won't be able to fish as much as...
Because your mom likes to fish a lot too.
She loves to fish. Okay. Yeah. So that was funny that she's like bummed about that. But I tell people it was a great place to grow up in, and I loved Alaska just with all the stuff it has to offer. I would probably move back there if I didn't have a great job, and my wife is super close with her family, and the cold and the dark is a little too much, which I don't blame her at all. But but we love Salem and her family, and now my family's down here, and so we're rooted here for sure.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. When did you? So you went to high school in Alaska. Mm-hmm. You did sports. You did running. What else?
Basketball and track, and I tried wrestling. Did some baseball, but usually basketball and running was my top two that I did all through high school. So yeah.
How do you think sports impacted you in the way you live your life now? Maybe how you raise your kids. Mm-hmm. What's that look like?
Yeah, I was pretty busy as a kid between sports and doing music and those sorts of things, and it was interesting doing like basketball, which is a team-oriented sport, which I loved. It was a good experience, and I loved playing basketball. I still play here and there, but and just having that team aspect of working with others and having a coach and listening to plays and different schemes and all of that, and pushing your body in that kind of way. But I think I really gravitated towards running because even though I love working as a team and everything, I love running because I was able to kind of just push myself. Like I had no other, like I was only competing versus myself. Like obviously I had like other teams and other runners I'm running against, but I just knew like, okay, this is on me. If I messed up, it's on me. Or if I do well, like it's because I put in the work to do that. And so it was interesting seeing those two different aspects of those two different sports. But I think there's benefits on both of them for sure. And it is funny now that my kids are getting older and they're doing sports, and they're still pretty young. So they're getting the basics right now. They're starting earlier than I did because I started like when I was in 4th grade, I believe. And so it's funny hearing my wife, who didn't do any sports really growing up. She did like snowboarding and music and those sorts of things. So she's like, are they good? Like, are they going to be okay in basketball or soccer? And I'm like, dude, they're just kids. Like, they're going to be fine. Yeah, who cares? Like, it's more about being out there, like having like a regimen of practice, listening to your coach and playing well with others. And so I think there is a benefit with that in sports for sure. Yeah.
No, I love that. I played football, which is a team sport. I wrestle, which is an individual. And like you, I like the challenge of, well, either I win or I lose, but it's 100% up to me. Mm-hmm. So I like that.
Yeah.
Well, how did you get to Salem, Oregon?
That's a good question.
Tell me that story, and then you met this lady, Allie, and you got married. So let's walk through that journey. Yeah. And tell me about that.
It was definitely a God thing, because being from Alaska, like, how do you find a Salem, Oregon, right?
You don't.
Yeah, exactly.
She's not going to Alaska.
Corban actually sent someone to our school. I went to a private school. Yeah. And when she came to talk about Corban, I already had decisions to go to other schools. Like I had scholarship offers at other places, even all the way to East Coast, and bigger schools that I'm like, okay, I can run for them. But I had this like sense of like not being like at peace with going to those schools. So like last minute, I'm like, oh, there was that school in Oregon. Maybe I'll go there. They have a running program. I want to do physical therapy. They have pre-med that I can take. And so last minute, I decided to just go there. And I have history of knowing Oregon pretty well because I did several running camps. And then I was fortunate to run for the state of Oregon for Team Alaska, or for Alaska. I was able to run for Team Alaska. And so we traveled Oregon and California, Washington several times a year for cross country. So I think, and this was silly, we always ran during the fall and the summertime, which was like gorgeous weather. And so when I'm like, oh, I'll just move to Oregon, it's like awesome there. Little did I know about the rain and the and all of that. And
welcome.
Yeah, which is not as bad as like the snow and the cold, but I'm like, oh, it snows or it rains a lot here. But yeah, that's how I ended up here. And I ended up loving Corban. I ran all 4 years there, met some of my best friends there. Yeah. And then that's also where I like really grew in my faith also, as far as like being in a private school, living at home. Like I still profess I was a Christian and all of that. But as far as like having that faith be my own, I kind of grew a lot when I was at Corban. And then I was also blessed to be on ASB student government at that time at Corban. And so a couple years after I graduated, I took a few years off of applying to PT school, and that's when I met Allie. And it was really funny when I met her. We met at church. It was a college group, and both of us were coming out of like long-term or like out of like relationships in the past, and we were both taking breaks from dating. And I lived by myself in a 1-bedroom apartment for 2 years without internet. I read, I worked, and ran. And I focused on my faith with God. And I'm like, who am I? Like, how can I like build my faith through that? And so when we first met each other, we were very like standoffish with each other. We're like, who are you? Like, and we ended up doing group things with each other. And we planned like this big hike. I planned a big hike out in South Sister with a bunch of friends, and Allie was included, and everybody dipped last minute because I planned to leave Salem at 4 a.m. and I guess that is early. But Allie, who like I'm like I think she likes me. She didn't drop out, so it was just me and her.
No way.
Yeah, and I was still like I lived in Oregon for a few years, but I still didn't know Oregon. So this was in October, and South Sister was covered in snow.
Yeah.
And so we get there and nobody's there, and it was covered in snow.
You can't climb in the snow. Yeah.
And I didn't know. So I'm like, oh, let's do it. And we did it. And Allie did the whole thing. And I'm like, who is this girl?
What month was this?
October.
Yeah.
October 5th. Yeah.
You don't climb in October.
Yeah.
The days are shorter. There's snow. You have to start really early.
Yep. We started early enough.
It was probably was it dark out when you started?
It was a little dark. But it was perfectly clear.
Yeah.
And it was, she did it. Like, she was a trooper, and she was like chatting the whole time. I'm like, okay. Like, and so when we were driving back, I was pretty awkward. I was like, all right, what is this? Like, if you just want to be friends, I don't want to do this.
You literally asked her the question.
Yeah. And I'm like, do you want to date? And she's like, yes. Yeah. Like after me, like mumbling and like stumbling on my words, she's like, no, I'm in this. And so
that's so cool.
And I think just that break of dating and focusing like on each, like we were on like both focusing on each other or on ourselves. And when we met, we were like, oh, this is right. Like, this is what God wants. And we were at peace. And 3 months later we were engaged, and 10 months after we started dating, we were married.
No kidding.
And so, yeah.
Wow, God had a plan. I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing. You had no idea. You thought,
no idea.
We're going hiking, and then she's the only one that shows up.
No, it was crazy.
It was a long day. You got up early.
Yeah.
But that time together sealed the deal.
Yeah. And it's just looping back to prayer. I drove up to Alaska with a friend to drop off a truck, and then I bought a new car and drove it back down, which is a long drive. It's like a 3-day drive.
Wow.
Like straight driving. And on the drive back, I drove by myself, and I had lots of time to pray and think. And so I prayed the whole time about it. This was before that South Sister hike. And then I went on a mission trip with our church to Jordan. And then when we got back from Jordan that summer, this was before Allie and I were dating, I like had this peace. I'm like, all right, God, I think I'm ready to date, but it's up to you. Like I'll just be patient with all of that. Cause it was hard, like being at Corban, I swear, like it was ring by spring, and everybody was like,
I hear
getting married. And I'm like, what's going on? But anyway, after like releasing that to God and just being at peace of where I was at, that's when I met Allie. So sorry I like looped back to that, but it was definitely God's timing. And so, and 10 years later, 3 kids later, here we are.
So go back a little bit. When did you think you accepted Christ? And I realize as you get older, it has to become your own faith, because a lot of times it's kind of your parents' faith.
Yep.
Mom and dad making you go to church or whatever. But where do you think you accepted Christ?
Yeah, I say I don't struggle with this question. I feel like when I was a kid, I definitely believed, Christ died for me.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, okay, that's when I like profess that I'm a Christian and everything like that. But it's one of those things where I believe that it's just like these moments of like being reassured in my faith of like either life circumstances or me doing something dumb where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm accepting this grace. Yeah, it's such an interesting question, just because like it is more of these like moments of like, okay, like I believe in God, like this, like that's where I like profess my faith to God and those kind of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like it
totally.
is more of like a lifetime of like being a Christian versus like, oh, at this time and date, that's when I was, I believed, yes.
And some people know a time and date. I do not. I'm like you. I'm like, I just know it happened during this season of my life.
Yep, season, yeah.
Yeah. I grew up in church and I didn't know Christ until I was 28. I didn't know a Bible verse.
Wow.
I mean, it's horrible to say, but I didn't know one Bible verse. And no, I get that. It's got to be your own faith. And so once you get to college, you're kind of, you have freedom. No mom and dad.
Right.
We call that free will that God gives you, and you can choose to do something really dumb. I'm sure we all do something dumb. But okay, so you meet Allie, you guys get married. I forget what year are you in at this point in time? Are you done with college, or you've got your undergrad, you're done, and then you get married because the graduate doesn't come till later? Yeah,
after we got married and we got back from our honeymoon, Allie started her master's program in teaching like 2 weeks later. So she did that. And then I started applying to PT school. Yeah. And so it took me a couple years to get in. And so we figured we'll take turns giving all our money to George Fox because she went there too.
That's right.
So when she was done, that's when I started PT school. And as I said, it took me a while to get in, a couple years just because of how competitive it is. Yeah. But she was an awesome person that supported me during that whole application process. And so... and there was a lot, like it's one of those things where like God's timing of during that season, like of me working and she's going through school, like me supporting her and us figuring out what it looks like to be married and to be with someone 24/7. And then her getting through it and then her supporting me through PT school. So, yeah.
So here's the question, when you're in those seasons when you don't know where you're going and when you get to PT school, did you find yourself like worrying, like, God, where do you want me to go? And when you're now here, you look back, do you see the faithfulness of God and his hand in all of it? I mean, can you see it?
Yeah.
And how do you encourage people who are in a season of wilderness or desert, drought? Yeah. And how do you, from a spiritual standpoint, how do you encourage people?
Yeah, that is... I feel like prayer is important and community and having people around you to encourage you. Yeah. And it's interesting you said deserts. I mentioned my first kid's name is River. And his name's River because I've always loved that name. Yeah. But that was another thing we were kind of wrestling with during the first years of marriage. My wife actually had like infertility issues. Yeah. And we saw 10, 12 different doctors. And all of them said like, oh, you won't ever be able to have kids. We think like a doctor even diagnosed her with bipolar disorder and those sorts of things. And that was a really rough season of pushing through it. But it's just one of those things where you just have to kind of just be praying and just knowing that like God's faithfulness through it is going to, there has to be a reason for it at the end. Yeah. And going back to that stress, like what you learn from that stressful season, right? And it turns out Allie was like, her hormones were kind of off, taking a certain medication. And after figuring out her thyroid issue, within 3 months of a window, I got accepted in PT school and we found out we were pregnant. And I think it's Isaiah 43, where God says like, I will make something new and I can even have rivers and deserts. And I think there's also in a song, in a worship song, and that, so we always picture a river as just a river of life through a barren desert that Allie just always pictured her body was was at, like, of being just a desert of like, I can never have kids, or I guess this is our lives. And so just knowing that God's blessing, despite whatever we picture ourselves in, is pretty beautiful. For sure.
God's going to accomplish whatever he's going to accomplish. It's kind of like Abraham and Sarah, who, hey, you're going to have a child in your old age, and she's laughing like, and God can do whatever you're going to do. How long was the gap between you guys getting married and realizing you can't have kids before you actually had kids? How long was that?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, 3 years.
I really love the name River. It's not just, hey, it's a river, but the message and the story behind it is really a testimony of how God, he brings the river. He's the river, the living water, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was reading the scripture and I can't, it talks about, I can't remember if I'm in Jeremiah or where I'm at anyway, but being in the wilderness, being in the desert was really something I was thinking about. But that's where God finds us. And so when good things happen in our life, it's not me that did it. It's actually him that does it. He wants the glory. And and now are we going to give him the glory? My wife and I got married, and we thought, I don't know, we weren't like trying to have kids, but we weren't trying not to have kids. But really, 4.5 years into it, it's like, oh, we can't have kids, just like you guys. So we actually, but I see God's hand working in our lives, because I wasn't a believer. It was during that period of time where that desert, that wilderness feeling. But it was interesting. We finally got the final note saying you can't have kids. Like, and we had, for me, I don't know about my wife, but we had this moment of peace. And within probably months, my wife gets pregnant. I come to know the Lord. I'm in a Bible study. I mean, do that math. I mean, I wouldn't have desired to do it that way, but that's how God wanted to do it. And so we have 2 kids now, 2 daughters that are 27, 25. And that's a similar story to you guys. And so I understand your devastation and desert journey. I'm sure a lot of people have gone through that.
But it's one of those things you just take for granted, or growing up you think, oh, that's just a simple thing, like is having kids, but how complex and having kids is a blessing, and how that only God is able to kind of overcome those hurdles. And that definitely directs it to him as far as the glory and blessing, for sure.
Do you think, is that one of the pivotal moments in your life where your faith even grew more, would you say? Or is there something else that caused your faith to grow?
Yeah, that was a big moment, just with the answered prayer and just that testimony of like, okay, like God is with us, like he's listening, despite it taking, I know it's silly, like when you're thinking about it, like, 3 years, like in the grand scheme of things, is that a long time? Like you look at things in the Bible where they're wandering the desert for
40 years.
40 years. I know. Yeah, like whenever I read the Bible, I'm like, oh my gosh, like they're just skipping, like not skip, but they're like talking about these big gaps in time when, before things are like different or changed, or like, so definitely that was like one of those like milestone moments of like, okay, this is where I'm a little deeper in my faith, and trusting in God and those sorts of things. Which is silly because I feel like I still struggle with those things of trusting and having faith in the thing, even though he has been faithful as far as answering those prayers. So it's just silly of our sin nature of looping back to that of like, God, are you listening? Or like, what's going on here? Like, but that's just where that grace comes in, as far as like God loves us despite us having
he's faithful in spite of us being faithful to him.
Exactly. Yeah.
You asked a question, is 3 years a long time? Well, looking back, 3 years goes by pretty fast. So 3 is not that long time. But when you're in the desert and you don't know when the 3 years is in, is it 3 years or is it 40 years?
Yeah.
And so that's the question is, but it's interesting. Didn't God still provide manna and shoes for those people wandering in the desert for 40 years? He still provided. In spite of them, they're complaining and moaning and groaning. And but I think the question is, do we trust him?
Yeah.
Do we trust that he has our best intention. And I actually believe he does. And I don't just believe, I actually know he does. His word says so.
Yeah.
So,
no, I think, I don't know. I'm not perfect at it, but I feel like most of my prayer is directed toward just thankfulness and just like literally counting your blessings. Because I feel like that just changes your perspective of thinking too, of like what am I thankful for? Like, what am I blessed with? And that just changes your perspective of like, God has provided, he has been faithful. And those things that I'm stressing about and worrying about in the future or in that moment kind of dissipates as far as changing that thinking and directing those prayers. So,
well, here's the deal. We get more of what we focus on. So when you read a verse like Matthew 6:33, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. It doesn't say seek first buddies, doubts and fears and worries, right? And I literally say those things to myself, like, it's almost comical. It's like, here I am worried about me. But God says to, give thanks in all things. This is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Rejoice always, pray continually. 1 Thessalonians 5:16, 17, 18, it's just, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks. I mean, honestly, boom, boom. Yeah. If we know who we are and we know whose we are, shouldn't it be pretty simple? Then why, Kevin? Please.
Why? Please
tell me, why am I still struggling with the truth that I can trust God with everything?
No, for sure.
So weird.
Yeah. It is interesting, like having just these life things of changing, like when it was just me living, like I can focus on my faith, on me and those around me. And then being married, like what does that look like? Being married and supporting someone else. And now having kids, like what that looks like of, I just think I love how God uses that, like, that example of the church being his bridegroom and then his children, like the church and everything like that. And being a parent now, it just, you kind of understand that to a certain degree now of like, oh, like I love my kids despite them making who knows what choices in life. And just that's how it is. Obviously that's just simple, like theology of God loves us when we make mistakes. And I will make mistakes as far as, so I'm not trying to compare like that, but it's just, I love that analogy of like just that unconditional love despite what my kids might do. And like, they'll say something where just that sin nature that we're born with just comes out and you're like, where's this coming from? And you're like, oh yeah, we're born with that sin. And how can I direct that in a graceful and loving way that directs them towards God? And so I don't know if that answers your question.
It's good. I mean, and kids are funny. Kids just speak what's on their mind. They don't have a filter necessarily. And I like the pureness of a child. I mean, I really do. And but yeah, you're right. How do we take the choice of our kids? Because here's the deal. We've also been there. God had patience and grace and mercy with us to bring us along, and he loves you unconditionally. There's no condition. It's unconditional. And so with that, we're gonna wrap up this podcast. Here's the question for you, man. Because I think for married men, half of marriages end in divorce, right? Could be more, could be less. I don't know the numbers exactly, but how do we stay married? So when you think about the priorities of your life, I want to know what those look like to you. And then the question with that is, how do you love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her? How do you live that out on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's
piece of cake, right?
Yeah.
Let's call Allie. We're gonna ask her the question. How you're doing?
How I'm doing? Yeah,
that's right.
I think it goes into that, just challenging that selfishness that kind of creeps up as far as just that grind of being like working full time, being married, being a parent. Like there's that selfishness that creeps in of like, I'm doing a lot. Like I need time for this or this. And then something comes up and you're like, oh, like, but just having that like servant attitude of like, okay, how can I support and help Allie? How can I support and help my kids despite what other stressors are happening in my life? And it's just this constant like mental check of keeping myself in check, like of just understanding the needs of what's needed in the family, not just money wise or support wise, but emotionally, spiritually. And once again, that's easier said than done. But it's one of those things that you just have to like just keep track of like minute by minute. Like you might just be locked in on something at work, like on the computer, at home. And then a kid, like one of my kids runs up and needs my help, and just being available and having that servant attitude of like, okay, how can I help them? Or help my wife? Cause she does a lot, cause she's also working full time now too. And, so yeah, I think that servant attitude and just helping out as much as I can in the home, and also just the task of like leading them spiritually, as far as like church, small groups, all those sorts of things, and directing them in that direction. And that's where if it was just me doing it, then I'm going to fail. And just making sure I'm in step with what God wants, and just praying about that of like, what do you want us, and make it clear and evident. And when we do make mistakes, not beat ourselves up about it, and just God says He gives us grace, which is always the hardest thing to do. And I think. When I was in undergrad, I was taking a class called childhood development, and it freaked me out because I'm like, oh my gosh, like you have to do all these things or else they're going to turn out to be terrible people in the future. And it always scared me of having kids. But after we heard the news of Allie being pregnant, I had this piece of like, no, like having, like it's a lifelong thing. Like they're not just going to all of a sudden decide like, oh, I'm going to be a bad person, I'm going to do this or that. Right. Like you want to like mentor and like guide them into making the right decisions, and praying that they have their faith with God for themselves. And I guess that's another thing too of having mentorship and those around you that you can kind of lean into and ask questions, because being a parent and a husband is, I don't know, in our society where you can get so many different opinions. I feel like having that right support system behind you is important. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, it totally does. I think that's what Jesus did. He came to serve and not be served. And, to love your wife as Christ loved the church, and gave Himself up for her. To die to self, to my selfish needs, because I'm selfish. I mean, I know I am. And really, how do I serve my wife and kids and ministry and clients or whatever? How do we love on people? How do we love unconditionally? And well, until God calls us home, he'll still be working on me.
We'll be working on it for sure.
Well, hey, we're going to wrap up, Kevin. If somebody wants to reach out to you to hear more about being, a young dad, a married guy, a PT, somebody needs some physical therapy, some encouragement, to be challenged, to be inspired. How do they reach out to you?
Yeah, if you want to reach out to me, my wife and I, we go to Salem Heights. So if you go to Salem Heights, come say hi. We go to the early service. And if you ever want to email me, my work email is kevin@healingmotionpt.com. And my phone number, 907-441-0239. But we're excited to just, as I said, we're rooted here in Salem, and I think we're just going to continually dig roots, or build roots, grow roots in
dig,
Salem.
Build, and grow.
Come on. Salem. And so we're excited to be part of the community and here in town for sure.
Well, it sounds like you're an all-in guy. I really appreciate your transparency today, and made it really available for people to reach out. And I'll put those in the show notes as well. So
Thank you.
Well, thank you for listening this week to Kevin's story. It's beautiful. He's got a beautiful family. And Carlos, we're praying for you, and Lonnie, you as well. And it's the whole family that is going through, tough times. We all do.
Yeah.
Be encouraged, be inspired, be in the Word. We love you guys. And if you ever want to be on the podcast, we'd love to have you. If you know somebody who wants to be on the podcast, please reach out to me. I'll put my information in the show notes as well. Happy New Year's coming up this next week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you, buddy.